Imagine a locked room mystery. Now, when you picture that classic trope, your brain probably goes straight to, I don't know, a dusty library in an English manor.
Right, yeah. The heavy oak door bolted from the inside.
Exactly. Maybe a single lead-paned window that's been painted shut and a detective in a tweed suit stroking his chin, trying to figure out how the culprit just vanished into thin air.
A very Agatha Christie kind of vibe.
Yeah, exactly. But the locked room I want you to imagine today isn't a room at all. It is a U-shaped concrete septic pipe.
Which is just a horrific image from the start.
It really is. And it's roughly 14 inches in diameter. And it is buried deep in the freezing, rock-hard ground of a remote Japanese mountain village.
Deep winter, too.
Deep winter. Inside this pipe, trapped in the pitch black, surrounded by winter frost and human waste, is a man.
Right.
And this man is 5'7". His shoulders are 16 inches wide.
Which is the detail that it breaks your brain.
It really does.
Yeah.
Let that sink in for a second. If you are listening to this right now, look at the width of your own shoulders. Now picture a medium Domino's pizza box.
Yeah, those are what, 14 inches?
About 14 inches wide, yeah. Mathematically, geometrically, biologically, a man with 16-inch shoulders should not be able to fit inside a 14-inch pipe.
It's just a physical paradox.
And yet there he is. How did he get in? Why was he completely barefoot and shirtless in the dead of winter?
Unbelievable.
And perhaps the most chilling detail of all, why, as he lay trapped in the dark, slowly suffocating and freezing, was he hugging a neatly folded, clean shirt to his chest?
It's an image that actively fights against human comprehension. I mean, when you look at the raw schematics of this crime scene, it defies our basic understanding of spatial reality, of human behavior, and honestly, of the fundamental survival instinct.
Right.
It's a physical impossibility wrapped in a deeply unsettling tragedy. And it's exactly the kind of scenario that forces us to suspend all of our preconceived notions before we even attempt to analyze the mechanics of what happened.
Which is exactly the mission of this deep dive. We are not here to just sit around a campfire and retell some spooky internet ghost story.
No, absolutely not.
We are taking a massive stack of sources to peel back over 30 years of internet rumors. We're looking for the undiscovered clues. We're doing a rigorous professional reanalysis of a physical impossibility.
And we have a lot of material to go through.
Tons. We're looking at viral true crime discussion threads that have been passionately debated across the globe, translated transcripts from Japanese media, detailed physical reconstructions from investigative YouTube channels, and even these really dense, highly technical academic papers from Forensic Science International.
It's the only way to get to the bottom of this. We have to meticulously debunk the myths that have clouded this incredibly baffling case since 1989.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to understand why this specific case exploded into a massive public petition with over 4,000 signatures, and why it became this viral phenomenon decades later, we can't just look at the pipe.
Right, you have to look at the person.
We first need to understand the man inside it. We need to know who Naoki was.
The identity of the victim is the absolute engine driving this entire mystery. The friction here, the reason this case refuses to die, is the massive glaring discrepancy between this man's highly public respected life and the deeply humiliating, bizarre circumstances of his death.
Yeah, it's a stark contrast.
The man found in that pipe was 26-year-old Naoki Kano. Now, depending on the translation of the Japanese sources you were looking at, you might occasionally see his surname written as Sugano or Ojino.
Just due to varying kanji readings, right?
Exactly. But for clarity today, we will just refer to him as Naoki. He lived in Miyakoji Village, which is situated in the Tamura district of Fukushima, Japan.
And we really need to set the scene for Miyakoji in 1989. This is not a sprawling, anonymous metropolis like Tokyo where you can just blend into the crowd. We are talking about a small, incredibly tight-knit mountain community.
Everyone knows everyone.
Literally. In villages like this, your business is the village's business. And more importantly, your reputation isn't just some personal vanity metric. It is your family's most valuable currency.
That cultural context is so vital. I mean, in traditional Japanese rural sociology, there is a heavy emphasis on community harmony and collective reputation. And Naoki's reputation was nothing short of sterling.
He was the golden boy.
To the village of Miyakoji, absolutely.
Yeah.
He was highly respected, incredibly sociable, and universally viewed as a reliable, upstanding young man. Professionally, he was doing exceptionally well for a 26-year-old.
Yeah, he had a really good job.
He worked as a sales manager for a company that maintained the nearby Fukushima Daini nuclear power plant. That is not a low-level gig.
No, not at all.
That's a position of significant responsibility. It requires a steady head, serious organizational skills, and a deeply trustworthy demeanor.
And he wasn't just a guy who went to work, clocked out, and went home to watch TV either. He was essentially the pillar of the community youth.
Very active.
The sources note he was incredibly active in the local youth association. He had distinct musical talent, and he was known for being exceptionally eloquent. So eloquent, in fact, that he was frequently asked to host local weddings.
Which is a huge deal.
Right. Let's think about what that means in a village setting. If families are asking you to MC their weddings, they're trusting you to represent the community at its most formal and joyous occasions.
You have to be incredibly polished.
Exactly. But it went beyond weddings. They even asked him to give political speeches for local election campaigns. This guy has serious charisma. He was a natural leader.
A community leader in the making, entirely integrated into the social fabric of Miyakoji. Which is why the psychological disconnect of his death is so profound and so violently jarring.
It makes no sense.
Because when the police eventually closed this case, their official, on-the-record conclusion was that Naoki was a perverted voyeur.
Wow.
They concluded he had willingly crawled into that septic pipe to peep on a woman, got physically stuck, and died of hypothermia.
To go from wedding MC to that?
Right. To his family, to his friends, and to the 4,300 people who eventually signed a petition demanding the case be reopened, that conclusion was not just unlikely. It was completely, fundamentally unacceptable.
It shattered their reality.
It entirely shattered their reality of who Naoki was.
Huh.
The cognitive dissonance was simply too massive for the village to process.
Wait, hold on, though. Let me push back on that for a second. Because don't we see this exact phenomenon all the time in true crime? The classic, he was such a quiet, nice boy syndrome?
Sure, here.
I mean, you look at the true crime discussion boards we pulled from, and there's this massive, heated debate about this exact psychological blind spot. One commenter specifically brought up John Wayne Gacy.
Oh, that's a chilling comparison.
But it fits, right? Gacy was a Democratic precinct captain. He ran a successful contracting business. He literally dressed up as a clown to entertain sick kids at local hospitals. He was a beloved community figure right up until they found the bodies under his floorboards.
That's very true.
Just because someone comes across as respectable, sociable, and eloquent in the daylight doesn't mean they aren't harboring a really dark, compulsive, secret life in the shadows. Public personas mask secret lives literally every single day.
You are tapping into a very real psychological reality there, and it is the central pillar of the debate surrounding this case. The internet sleuths and armchair psychologists accurately point out that extreme, unusual sexual fetishes known clinically as paraphilias are inherently secretive.
Right, you don't talk about that at a town hall.
Exactly. By their very nature, they carry deep social stigma, especially in a conservative culture. People do not broadcast their darkest compulsions. In fact, individuals who engage in voyeurism or other high-risk sexual behaviors often construct incredibly robust, normal, even exemplary public lives as a defense mechanism.
So it's almost a shield.
It's the concept of honen taime in Japanese culture, the stark division between one's true inner desires and the public facade one presents to society.
Yeah.
So forensically speaking, the argument that he would never do that because he was a nice guy who hosted weddings holds virtually zero weight.
It's an emotional defense, not an evidentiary one. But when you frame it around that culture of honen taime, you can really understand the family's utter horror.
Oh, absolutely.
Imagine your son, who you think is this upstanding nuclear plant sales manager, being forever immortalized in local history as the guy who died submerged in a literal toilet tank because of a bizarre fetish. The shame, the profound generational shame in a culture that highly values honor and reputation, it's unimaginable.
It's no wonder they fought so hard to prove it was murder.
Right.
The desperation to clear his name was immense, and that intense, grief-fueled denial, when combined with the genuinely baffling physical mechanics of the crime scene, created the ultimate breeding ground for conspiracy.
Yeah, a perfect storm.
But before we can even begin to dissect those theories, we have to lay out exactly what the police and the villagers saw. All of Naoki's charm, his community standing, his promising future, It all collided with a gruesome, horrific reality on a freezing winter evening.
Let's walk through the exact timeline because the timeline is where the cracks really start to show. The sequence of events leading up to his disappearance is completely mundane right up until the moment it isn't. It starts on February 23rd, 1989. Naoki attends a farewell party for a senior colleague. By all accounts from the people there, it's a completely normal night out. They're drinking, they're celebrating, the mood is good. The party goes late, wrapping up around 1:30 a.m. on the 24th.
He returns home, presumably sleeps off the festivities of the night before, and the next morning, February 24th, around 10 a.m., he has a brief interaction with his father.
And what does he say?
He simply states that he is going out to run errands. He leaves the house, and that is it. That is the last time anyone in his family ever sees Naoki Kano alive. He walks out the door and simply vanishes.
Now, to really grasp the setting, we need to contextualize the date. Late February 1989 in Japan is a very specific, somber cultural moment. The entire country is in a state of national mourning.
Emperor Shoei just passed away.
Right, Emperor Hirohito. And his state funeral is taking place. Because of this monumental historical event, it's a national memorial period. Schools are closed, businesses are operating on altered schedules, and people have time off. And this national holiday brings us to another key figure in this story.
The teacher.
A 23-year-old female elementary school teacher.
And this teacher lived in a single-room staff dormitory located not far from the elementary school where she worked in Miyakoji. Because of the national mourning period and the subsequent school closures, she decides to take a leave of absence from February 24th to February 27th.
So she's leaving town.
She plans to travel back to her hometown to visit her parents. This is a crucial, foundational detail for the entire case. Naoki knew this teacher.
They were friends.
They were acquaintances, part of the same broad social circle. And more importantly, he knew her schedule. He knew that she was going to be away for those specific 4 days and that her dormitory was going to be completely empty.
Okay, so let's check the movements. Naoki goes missing on the morning of the 24th. The teacher is gone from the 24th to the 27th. Now, on the 27th, while the teacher is still making her way back to the village, a friend of Naoki's happens to spot his car.
The white passenger car.
Yes, his white car, and it's parked in the lot of a nearby agricultural cooperative. But it's not parked normally in a designated spot. It's parked haphazardly, practically abandoned on a slope, like it was left in an absolute rush.
Just left there.
And when the friend walks up and looks through the window, the keys are still sitting right there in the ignition. The door is completely unlocked.
Which is an immediate red flag. I mean, leaving a car unlocked with the keys in the ignition in a public lot is highly unusual behavior. Even in a safe rural village, it visually suggests a sudden interruption.
Like someone was chasing him?
It looks exactly like someone slammed on the brakes, threw the car into park, jumped out and ran. This finding immediately escalates the situation from a simple missing person case to something potentially far more sinister.
And that escalating dread brings us to the harrowing discovery on the evening of February 28, 1989. The location is Miyakoji Village, Tamura District, Fukushima. It is deep winter. The weather is piercingly cold, well below freezing, and there's significant snow on the ground.
It's a brutal environment.
Around 6:00 p.m., the female teacher finally returns from her hometown to her single-room dormitory. Now, we really need to describe this building. These rural teacher dormitories in 1989 were not modern, sleek apartments.
No, very basic.
They were older, utilitarian structures. Each room had a small attached bathroom, and the toilet was not a Western-style seated toilet. It was a traditional Japanese squat toilet, essentially a ceramic pan set flush into the floor. And directly underneath that squat pan, buried in the earth, was the septic tank.
To truly understand the physical trap of this case, we have to visualize the architecture of that specific plumbing system in excruciating detail.
It's crucial.
Think of a massive, hollow, concrete U-shape buried in the ground. One top end of the U connects directly to the ceramic toilet pan inside the bathroom.
Oh.
The concrete pipe goes straight down into the earth, then flattens out into a horizontal holding tank area at the bottom of the U, and then the pipe curves back up the other side.
Right.
This secondary vertical pipe leads to an outdoor cleanout hole located right behind the dormitory. This hole is capped with a heavy lid. Periodically, a sanitation worker would come to the back of the building, lift that outdoor lid, insert a vacuum hose, and manually pump out the accumulated waste.
Okay, so it's around 6:00 p.m. The sun has set. It's freezing outside. The teacher goes into her bathroom. It's dimly lit. She looks down into the dark cavity of the squat pan pit and she sees something that absolutely does not belong there.
She sees a shoe.
She sees a shoe deep down inside the pan. Now, I don't know about you, but if I look into my plumbing and see a piece of human clothing, my heart is
No,
stopping.
absolutely terrifying.
She is understandably terrified. She runs out of her bathroom, out the front door, and scrambles around to the back of the building where that septic tank cleanout hole is located. Now, I want to pause here because early internet rumors and sloppy translations often claim she opened the heavy lid herself.
Right, which sparked all those theories about her.
Exactly. It fueled all these wild suspicions that she was somehow involved. But we must issue a crucial definitive correction here based on the original Japanese media transcripts. When she ran to the back of the building, the outside lid was already open.
That is a vital piece of the physical evidence timeline. The lid was already off. So she reached the open hole, she braces herself, peers down into the freezing, dark, foul-smelling waste tank, and she sees a human leg.
Just sticking out.
You can only imagine a sheer visceral terror of that moment. A human leg, pale in the winter darkness, sticking out from the muck. She screams, she runs to get her colleagues from the nearby school, and they immediately call the authorities.
The Miharu police station responds to the call, along with the local fire department. They arrive at the scene, shine their heavy-duty flashlights down the dark 14-inch hole, and they confirm the teacher's worst nightmare. There is a person wedged deep inside the pipe.
But they immediately run into a massive physical roadblock.
Yeah, they can't get him out.
They cannot pull the body out. The pipe is a mere 14 inches in diameter. The body is wedged in so incredibly tightly, at such an unnatural, twisted angle, that mere human strength isn't enough to extract it. If they try to pull him by the leg, they risk dislocating limbs or causing massive post-mortem damage.
It's like he's fused into the concrete.
It becomes a heavy rescue operation. The firefighters realize that manual extraction is impossible. They literally have to call in heavy earth-moving machinery.
Wow.
An excavator is brought into the quiet dormitory yard. They have to dig up the freezing, hardened ground all around the building, exposing the plumbing. And then they have to completely shatter and destroy the heavy concrete pipe with heavy tools just to gain access to him.
It's a massive, loud, destructive operation. And when they finally break open the concrete, extract the body, and wash off the waste, the village is worst. Most unthinkable nightmare is confirmed. The face staring back at them is Nayuki.
And this is where we have to paint the bizarre, chilling picture of the exact state of the body. Because the specifics of how he was found are what elevate this from a tragic accident to an enduringly perplexing mystery.
Yeah, the details are so weird.
Nayuki is dead. He is positioned deep in the flat, bottom, horizontal portion of that U-shaped pipe. He's lying flat on his back, but because the space is so cramped, his legs are bent up toward his chest in a tight fetal position.
So he's folded in half.
Pretty much. His face is oriented straight upwards, looking directly up the vertical pipe towards the indoor toilet pan. But it's the condition of his clothing, or rather the lack thereof, that defies logic.
Right, because it's February.
Remember, it is the dead of winter in Fukushima. There are 8 inches of snow on the ground outside. Yet, Nayuki is found completely topless. He has no jacket, no shirt. He is also completely barefoot.
Bare skin against freezing concrete.
Exactly. His arms are not flailing or reaching out in a panic. His hands are crossed tightly over his chest. And clamped against his bare skin, he is tightly hugging a neatly folded, clean shirt.
That part just, it gives me chills. Why would you fold your shirt while you're dying?
It's so strange. One of his shoes, the one the teacher spotted, is found inside the pipe, resting near his head. The other shoe is completely missing from the immediate scene. It is later discovered by police investigators quite a distance away, abandoned on a riverbed embankment slope.
Okay, so the body is transported to the morgue. And because of the environment he was found in, the body has to be thoroughly washed twice before the medical examiner can even begin the autopsy.
Which is a huge forensic issue, but we'll get to that.
Right. The forensic analysis determines that the time of death was around February 26th. Think about that timeline. He vanished on the 24th, he was discovered on the 28th, but he died on the 26th.
That means he was alive inside that pitch-black, freezing pipe for roughly 2 days.
2 days in the dark. The official cause of death is determined to be hypothermia, compounded by chest circulation failure.
We need to explain the physiological mechanics of that cause of death, because chest circulation failure sounds clinical, But the reality is agonizing.
It's essentially suffocation, right?
Yes, positional asphyxiation. When a human body is wedged that tightly into an unyielding space like a 14-inch concrete tube, the chest cavity is physically compressed. Every time you exhale, your ribcage contracts, and in a tight space, you might slip an inch further down.
Oh, God.
But when you try to inhale, the concrete walls prevent your diaphragm and ribcage from fully expanding. You cannot take a full breath. Over hours and days, this leads to a slow, agonizing form of positional asphyxiation. Couple that with the extreme cold of the surrounding earth, which rapidly draws core body heat away, and the heart eventually cannot maintain circulation. The cold stops the heart, while the compressed lungs starve it of oxygen.
I've always thought of the physics of this trap like a human Chinese finger trap. You know those little woven bamboo tube toys?
Oh, yeah, the ones where your fingers get stuck.
Yeah. You stick your index fingers into both ends, and when you panic and try to pull them out, the woven bamboo tightens, constricting and locking your joints in place. The harder you pull, the tighter it gets.
That's a perfect analogy.
If Naoki exhaled, reduced his body profile, and forced himself down into that narrow vertical pipe, his knees, his elbows, his shoulders would all get pinned against the raw, abrasive concrete. Every single time he tried to push back up against gravity, he wouldn't be able to generate the leverage to back out. He couldn't bend his arms to push. He'd just wedge his joints tighter against the walls.
That is a highly accurate, terrifyingly visceral analogy. And the physical evidence from the autopsy explicitly supports that specific struggle.
What did they find?
The medical examiner noted minor, superficial scratches and abrasions on his knees and elbows. Those are the exact contact points that would be scraping desperately against the rough concrete as he tried to maneuver, squirm, or free himself from the trap.
So he was moving around in there.
He was trying to. But crucially, and this is the detail that the police anchored their entire conclusion on, there was absolutely no major trauma. There were no broken bones, no skull fractures, no defensive wounds on his hands, indicating he had fought off an attacker.
Nothing to show he was forced.
Furthermore, the toxicology reports came back completely clean. There were no signs of alcohol, toxic substances, or drugs in his system. He was completely sober when he died.
So the police look at this totality of evidence. They see the lack of defensive wounds. They see his face position looking up toward the toilet pan. They see the folded shirt, which looks like someone trying to keep their clothes out of the muck. And they make their ruling.
Accidental death of a peeping Tom.
Case closed. But the math, the simple, undeniable geometry of the scene immediately caused a massive public uproar that birthed a 30-year internet obsession. Why? Because the measurements of that pipe and the measurements of Naoki simply did not compute.
This brings us to the core of the controversy. The anatomy of an impossible crime scene and a necessary professional reanalysis of the physics involved. Let's look at the hard, unforgiving numbers.
Right, let's do the math.
The pipe's outer cleanout opening, which was the absolute only possible point of entry, considering the indoor toilet pan opening was a mere 8 inches wide, was exactly 14 inches, or 36 centimeters in diameter.
Okay, 14 inches.
Naoki was 5'7", or 169.2 centimeters tall, and he weighed 69.5 kilograms, which is about 153 pounds.
Right. He wasn't a giant, but he was a healthy, fully grown man. And according to anatomical data released by the Japanese Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry, the average shoulder width for a Japanese man of his age and build is 16 inches, or 40 centimeters.
So there's the paradox.
So let's visualize the Domino's pizza box again. You have a 16-inch wide man and a 14-inch wide hole. You don't need a PhD in geometry to see why the entire village thought the police were either corrupt or completely insane. How does a 16-inch object pass through a 14-inch solid concrete ring without being violently crushed?
The discrepancy was so glaring, and the police's explanation felt so insulting to his character, that Naoki's own father took it upon himself to prove the authorities wrong.
Yeah, this part breaks my heart.
Driven by grief, he actually built a full-scale, 1-to-1 replica of the cutout septic pipe, using the exact 36-centimeter dimensions. He attempted to demonstrate, physically, that it was impossible for a man of his son's size to enter the pipe willingly, with or without closing.
He wanted to show the math just didn't work.
He wanted to show that the human shoulder structure simply wouldn't permit it. This highly publicized experiment deeply cemented the murder theory in the minds of the villagers. Their logic was straightforward. If he couldn't possibly get in there willingly, he must have been forced in. And if he was forced in, someone killed him.
But wait, if he was forced in, the autopsy explicitly said there was no trauma. This is where my brain gets stuck. How do you force a sober, conscious, 150-pound man into a tiny concrete pipe without leaving massive, undeniable bruising?
It seems contradictory.
He would be thrashing, fighting, bracing his legs against the edges. You'd have to break his shoulders or bash his skull in to get him down there. This is where the forensic context of 1989 Japan becomes incredibly relevant to our deep dive.
Yes, the academic research on this is fascinating.
We're looking at a highly detailed academic paper from Forensic Science International regarding the historical background of postmortem imaging in Japan. And it sheds a massive amount of light on why this case remains so murky and why the villagers' doubts were completely justified.
If we dive into the data from that Forensic Science International paper, we uncover a systemic, structural issue in Japanese death investigations. It's an issue that persists in some forms even today, but it was absolute, unquestioned standard practice in rural Japan in 1989.
And what's that?
Japan has an incredibly, almost shockingly low autopsy rate compared to other developed nations. Overall, it hovers around 2% of all deaths.
2%. That's nothing.
And even in cases of unusual, sudden, or suspicious deaths, the administrative autopsy rate is only about 11.2%. There are complex cultural reasons for this. A deep reverence for the physical integrity of the deceased, a reliance on suspect confessions rather than physical evidence, and a lack of funding for rural medical examiners.
So how do they determine cause of death?
In a vast majority of cases, the cause of death is determined merely by an external visual examination by a local doctor and a brief police walkthrough.
And in 1989, advanced forensic technology was practically non-existent for routine, non-homicide cases in rural prefectures like Fukushima. The FSI paper talks extensively about something called PMCT, postmortem computed tomography.
Also known as autopsy imaging, or A.
Right, abbreviated as AI, so it doesn't get confused with artificial intelligence. PMCT uses powerful CT scanners to create 3D cross-sections of the inside of a body without ever making a traditional scalpel incision. But in 1989, PMCT was science fiction for a rural police force.
Completely unheard of out there.
It wasn't until much later, around the mid-2000s, that pioneering researchers like Dr. Hirotaru Ayes started scanning bodies and proving that at least 20% of the causes of death reported by police from initial visual investigations were actually completely objectively erroneous. They were missing internal bleeding, subtle fractures, all sorts of things.
Which raises an absolutely critical question for our reanalysis. What did the autopsy of Naoki Kano in 1989 completely miss?
Right.
Without advanced imaging like modern PMCT, the medical examiners were relying purely on external visual inspection and traditional localized dissection. Think about how modern PMCT works. A CT scanner takes hundreds of X-ray slices to build a complete internal map.
It sees everything.
It can easily detect hidden microscopic hemorrhages deep in the muscle tissue. It can find subtle internal bruising around the ribs or shoulders that would result from being violently shoved or forced into a tight space. It can identify microscopic markers of asphyxiation or crush injuries that might not manifest as massive purple bruises on the surface of the skin.
Especially on a body that has been freezing cold for 2 days. Blood-pooling liver mortis acts differently in freezing temperatures, and let's not forget the most damaging fact: the body was covered in human waste.
Right, the contamination.
It had to be vigorously washed, not once but twice, before the examiner could even touch it. Any trace evidence, hairs, fibers, subtle surface scratches, DNA from an attacker, could have literally been washed down the morgue drain before the autopsy even started.
Exactly the point. The physical autopsy, constrained by the technological limits of 1989 and the compromised state of the body, left just enough ambiguity for conspiracy theories to absolutely thrive.
It's a perfect storm of missing data.
The police say, he crawled in, it's an accident. The mathematical measurements say he shouldn't physically fit. The autopsy says, we see no trauma. But the forensic reality of 1989 says, maybe you just couldn't see the trauma that was there. It is the absolute perfect recipe for a true crime legend to be born.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because when there is an evidentiary vacuum, human nature abhors it. We cannot stand unexplained mysteries. And the internet did what the internet does best. It spawned incredibly intricate, deeply woven theories.
Oh, the theories in this case are legendary.
For decades, Reddit threads, Japanese true crime forums like 2channel, and amateur sleuths have fiercely debated 4 major theories. Let's dive into the psychology and the logic of each one. We'll start with the most intimate, the personal grudge theory, involving the teacher and her boyfriend. We know Naoki was part of their social circle.
The foundation of this specific theory lies in a documented previous incident that adds a layer of stalking and harassment to the narrative.
The phone calls.
Right. In the weeks leading up to the incident, the female teacher had been receiving a disturbing series of harassing, silent, or prank phone calls at her dormitory. Nayuki, playing the role of the reliable, upstanding friend we described earlier, actively stepped in to help.
He wasn't just watching from the sidelines?
No, he assisted her and her boyfriend in setting up equipment to record these harassing calls, and he was the one who physically handed the cassette tapes over to the police. He was actively involved in trying to protect her.
But the internet loves a dark, dramatic twist. Some commenters on the forum speculated, what if the dynamic wasn't that simple? What if they had a falling out? What if there was a secret, unrequited love triangle and Nayuki became a threat or a nuisance?
It's a very cinematic theory.
The theory suggests that perhaps the teacher and the boyfriend lured him to the dormitory, murdered him in a fit of rage, and then, in an act of ultimate psychological cruelty, stuffed his body into the septic tank to humiliate him in death.
It's a narrative that sounds perfectly suited for a soap opera or a thriller novel. But as analysts, if we strip away the melodrama and analyze it logically, it lacks any structural concrete evidence.
There's no proof.
None. There is no historical record or witness testimony suggesting a falling out. There is zero evidence of an affair. And practically speaking, we return to the geometry of the pipe.
Right. How do they get him in there?
Exactly. How would a 23-year-old schoolteacher and her boyfriend manage to force a conscious, fit, fighting 26-year-old man into a 14-inch pipe without leaving a single defensive mark on his hands, without breaking his shoulders, and without drawing the attention of anyone in the vicinity with the noise of the struggle? It fundamentally strains credulity.
Okay, if the teacher and the boyfriend didn't have the physical means or the proven motive, we have to look at who else was in their orbit. Who else had a reason to want Nayuki gone? Which transitions us to the second major theory, the harasser's revenge.
This one makes a bit more logical sense regarding motive.
Remember those harassing phone calls Nayuki was helping investigate? According to several sources, Nayuki had recently confided in another friend that he had actually figured out the true identity of the caller. But crucially, he was keeping the name a secret for the time being.
This introduces a highly compelling logical motive. If the person making those calls was not just some random prankster, but a powerful figure in the community, perhaps a married community leader, a local politician, or someone with ties to organized crime, Nayuki discovering their identity made him a massive liability.
He knew too much.
In a village where reputation is currency, a scandal involving stalking the young teacher could ruin a powerful man. Did this harasser realize Nayuki knew the truth and silence him before he could go to the police with the name?
It's a classic whistleblower scenario, but again, I keep hitting the same wall. Why a septic tank?
It's so overly complicated.
Murdering someone to silence them is one thing. Orchestrating their death inside a frozen, highly complex plumbing system is another entirely. If you want a problem to go away, you don't create a bizarre spectacle that guarantees a massive police investigation.
Which is the exact logical flaw that pushes many theorists toward the more sprawling systemic conspiracies. If a single harasser couldn't pull it off, what about a coordinated group?
A conspiracy.
This brings us to the political theories, which get incredibly intense and involve the highest levels of local power. 10 days before Nayuki died, on February 18th, the village of Miyakoji held a fiercely contested, highly polarized election for village chief.
And Nayuki was involved.
Because Nayuki was such a gifted orator, he was heavily involved. He was actively campaigning, giving speeches for the incumbent candidate, a man named Watanabe. But the timeline shows something strange. Right before the final vote, Nayuki abruptly stopped showing up to the political rallies. He just went home and withdrew.
The rumor mill immediately seized on this sudden withdrawal. The theory posits that Nayuki, while working on the inside of the campaign, unwittingly stumbled onto some incredibly shady, illegal backroom politics.
Like what?
Maybe it was vote buying, maybe it was embezzlement. The speculation was that he discovered a scandal so massive he wanted to blow the whistle, and the political machine, realizing they couldn't buy his silence, had him eliminated by professionals before he could talk.
The timing of his death is definitely suspicious.
Occurring mere days after the election concluded, it certainly poured gasoline on this speculative fire.
And it wasn't just local village zoning politics at stake. It was tied to massive, multi-billion yen national infrastructure. And this is where we must proceed with neutral analytical reporting, simply laying out what the sources in the forums have discussed for decades without taking a stance.
Absolutely, we're just looking at the source material.
The village of Miyakoji was geographically and economically tethered to the Fukushima Daini nuclear power plant. The community was deeply, fundamentally divided between pro-nuclear and anti-nuclear factions. Supporters argued the plant was the lifeblood of the town, bringing essential jobs, subsidies, and modern infrastructure. Opponents were deeply fearful of the environmental impact and the catastrophic health risks.
And this division wasn't just theoretical debate. It was heightened by a terrifying, real-world incident. Just a single month prior to Naoki's death, a severe accident occurred at the Fukushima Daini plant.
A major failure.
A welded joint inside a massive circulating pump of Reactor 3 catastrophically failed. This failure caused a massive leak of metal fragments into the system, forcing an emergency shutdown of the entire reactor. It was a major crisis.
And here's the connection to Naoki.
Now, here is the detail that sends the conspiracy theorists into overdrive. The person in charge of maintaining that specific reactor was a direct colleague of Naoki's at the maintenance company. And shortly after the accident, that colleague committed suicide by jumping in front of a moving train in Tokyo.
It is a profound, shocking sequence of tragedies. And in the minds of those looking for a unified theory, the dots seemingly connected themselves into a terrifying constellation.
It all lines up.
You have a major nuclear accident. You have the subsequent suicide of a key maintenance official. You have a highly contentious village election where the incoming chief will wield significant power over the nuclear plant's local operational agreements and subsidies. And then amidst all this chaos, Naoki, who works for the very same nuclear maintenance company and actively campaigns for the village chief, suddenly turns up dead in the most bizarre, inexplicable manner possible.
The theory that emerged from this web is that Naoki had discovered a massive systemic cover-up. Maybe he found forged safety documents linking the Reactor 3 failure to corner cutting. Maybe he found evidence of bribery connecting the plant executives to the village election.
A massive conspiracy.
The belief is that he was murdered by corporate fixers or hired assassins to protect a multi-billion-yen national industry from a devastating whistleblower scandal.
It sounds exactly like the plot of a high-stakes political thriller. The narrative momentum of that theory is undeniably seductive. But as forensic analysts, we have to pull ourselves out of the narrative and look at the brutal physical mechanics of the actual crime scene. And this is where your skepticism from earlier becomes the most vital tool we have. We have to ask if this was a professional hit. Why this specific method?
Exactly. I cannot get past this point. Think about the logistics. If you are a shadowy corporate syndicate or a corrupt political machine, and you have the resources to hire professional assassins to silence a whistleblower, why on earth would you orchestrate a highly public, convoluted, physically exhausting death involving a 14-inch septic pipe?
It's the worst possible way to hide a body.
If you have the power to assassinate someone and cover it up, you stage a drunk driving accident on a winding mountain road. You make them disappear into the deep wilderness. You frame a burglary gone wrong in their home. You do not carefully remove their shoes or fold their shirt into a neat little square and spend hours trying to jam their rigid body down a toilet pipe located right behind a teacher's dormitory, knowing full well that a sanitation worker or the teacher herself will inevitably find the body and trigger a massive prefecture-wide media circus.
It's absurd.
It makes zero tactical or strategic sense for a cover-up.
It completely defies all logic of professional concealment. A successful cover-up relies on the death appearing utterly unremarkable. The goal is to make the police write it off in 5 minutes. Naoki's death was the exact opposite of unremarkable. It was a grotesque spectacle that practically demanded a decades-long investigation.
Right.
And modern physical reanalysis strongly, unequivocally supports your skepticism. If we look at the exhaustive deep dive conducted by the investigative YouTube channel Lauke's Mystery Talk, they systematically dismantle several of these conspiracy myths, not with theories, but with hard physics and physical reconstruction.
This is my absolute favorite part of the modern analysis, because for 30 years, everyone just blindly accepted the father's grief-stricken experiment. Everyone repeated the mantra, a 16-inch shoulder cannot fit in a 14-inch pipe, therefore it's murder.
But Lauke tested it.
But Lauke's channel, following in the footsteps of a few dedicated Japanese TV investigative shows, actually put this geometric puzzle to a rigorous scientific test. They didn't just look at numbers on a chalkboard, they built exact 1-to-1 scale replicas of that specific 36-centimeter pipe using smooth PVC and reinforced cardboard.
A physical mock-up.
And then they hired volunteers who perfectly matched Naoki's exact physical dimensions, 169.2 centimeters tall, 69.5 kilograms in weight.
And what those rigorous physical experiments definitively proved completely flips the case on its head. A man of those exact dimensions can willingly squeeze into a 14-inch pipe.
It's possible.
It is not geometrically impossible. However, the experiments revealed there are incredibly strict, unforgiving physical conditions required to achieve it. First, the individual cannot be wearing a thick winter jacket or multiple layers, as the fabric adds too much sheer bulk.
Hence why he was shirtless.
Exactly. Second, and most importantly, they cannot go in feet first. They must enter head first, reaching their arms up above their head and intentionally angling their torso. They have to utilize the natural, biological flexibility of the human clavicle, the collarbone, which can compress and shift slightly when the arms are extended upwards.
So they sort of squish their shoulders together.
It is an extremely tight, profoundly uncomfortable, claustrophobic fit, but it is physically possible for a motivated individual to wriggle their way down using gravity and squirming motions.
And this physical revelation is the key that unlocks the autopsy report. Because if you are squirming headfirst down a rough concrete tube, dragging your entire body weight against the walls, what parts of your body are going to take the brunt of the friction?
Your elbows and your knees.
Your elbows and your knees. It perfectly, elegantly explains the minor, superficial abrasions the medical examiner noted, and it explains the complete lack of massive blunt force trauma. He wasn't beaten with a pipe or shoved by 3 hitmen. He slowly, agonizingly squeezed himself in.
Furthermore, the modern reanalysis completely, definitively debunks the murder hiding the body theory based on one tiny critical detail from the crime scene itself.
The lid.
Remember the state of the outdoor cleanout lid? When the female teacher ran outside in a panic, the heavy lid was already open. Think about the psychology of a killer. If an assassin or a group of conspirators had somehow managed to force Naoki into that pipe to dispose of his body, their absolute first, most primal instinct would be to close the lid behind him.
Of course, you hide the body, you close the container.
Leaving a massive, heavy lid open in the snow practically guarantees the body will be found immediately. The fact that the lid was open strongly, almost undeniably suggests that the last person to touch it was Naoki himself as he entered the pipe.
So if we follow the physical evidence and strip away the corporate assassins, the political hit squads, and the dramatic soap opera love triangles, we are left staring at a deeply uncomfortable, undeniable conclusion. Naoki Kano willingly, purposefully climbed into that freezing foul pipe on his own volition.
Which leaves us with the ultimate question. Why?
What could possibly drive a successful, popular young man to do that? We are left with 2 remaining theories. The first is the original conclusion reached by the Miharu police, the fetish or voyeur theory.
This theory relies heavily on a deep understanding of extreme psychological compulsions. In the countless Reddit discussions and psychological analyses of the case, experts point out that people driven by extreme paraphilias such as severe voyeurism or coprophilia, which is the fetishistic interest in excrement, will go to astonishing, highly dangerous, logic-defying lengths to fulfill their fantasies.
It overrides common sense.
When a compulsion takes over, the rational brain, the part that calculates risk and self-preservation, is entirely bypassed.
According to the psychological profile, the timeline makes a twisted sort of sense. Naoki knew the teacher was away visiting her parents. He knew the dorm was empty. The theory suggests he saw a window of opportunity to test the view or fulfill a dark compulsion without the immediate, terrifying risk of getting caught by her.
He had a free pass, basically.
He drives his car over, parks it. He walks to the back of the dorm, heaves the heavy lid open. He looks down the pipe. He realizes his thick, expensive winter clothes will either get ruined by the filth or they will make him too physically bulky to fit through the opening. So, driven by the compulsion, he takes his jacket and shirt off.
And folds them.
He folds the shirt neatly, perhaps a lingering habit of his put-together public persona, trying to keep it clean on the snowy ground, and he hugs it to his bare chest. He drops his shoes. One falls down the pipe, one gets left in the snow, and he begins the tight squeeze inward.
But he tragically miscalculates the physical reality of the trap. He wriggles down the vertical shaft. But once he clears the bend and gets his torso under the toilet pan, he realizes he is completely immobilized.
The finger trap.
He can't move his arms downward to generate the upward thrust needed to push himself back out against gravity.
Yeah.
The panic sets in. He drops the shoe he was holding. He realizes he is stuck. And over the next 48 hours, he slowly, agonizingly freezes to death in the dark.
It is a grim, deeply embarrassing, and undignified theory. And when you lay it out like that, it completely explains the family's fervent, desperate denial and their willingness to believe in corporate assassins. No parent wants to believe that about their child. Mechanically, it fits the evidence, but there is a detail that bothers me.
The car.
The car. Why was his car parked so haphazardly with the keys still in the ignition? If you are sneaking around to fulfill a secret voyeuristic fantasy, you park discreetly. You take your keys. You don't abandon your car running on a slope like you're fleeing a bank robbery.
That is the big flaw in the voyeur theory.
This is where the YouTuber Lau K presents a second, highly plausible alternative, one that relies less on a secret sexual fetish and more on sheer, blind human panic. This is the fleeing theory.
The fleeing theory synthesizes the bizarre behavioral clues, the car, the lost shoe, into a narrative of sudden, overwhelming terror. Let's return to the morning of the 24th. Naoki tells his father he's running errands. The theory suggests he was actually going out to meet someone.
A confrontation.
Perhaps he was finally confronting the person making those harassing phone calls to the teacher, since he had told a friend he knew the identity. Or perhaps it was a sudden dispute over something else, entirely a debt, a slight, a localized conflict. Whatever the nature of the meeting was, it goes horribly, violently wrong. The situation escalates rapidly.
Hayuki suddenly realizes he is in immediate, severe physical danger. The person he is meeting has a weapon, or there are multiple people. The flight response kicks in. He flees in a blind, adrenaline-fueled panic. He jumps into his car, speeds away, but they are chasing him.
He's desperate.
He realizes he can't outrun them on the winding rural roads. He pulls into the agricultural cooperative, slams the car into park haphazardly on the slope, leaves the keys in the ignition because there's no time, and he bails out on foot, sprinting for his life. In his desperate, chaotic sprint down the steep embankment toward the riverbed, he stumbles. He loses one of his shoes in the snow, which perfectly, elegantly explains why the police found a single shoe far away from the actual crime scene.
He's running barefoot in the freezing snow, his heart pounding, constantly looking over his shoulder. He needs a place to hide, and he needs it immediately. The pursuers are closing in. In his panicked state, his brain scans his mental map of the village. He remembers the teacher's dormitory is nearby.
He knows it's empty.
And more importantly, he knows for a fact that she is out of town. The building is empty. It's the perfect temporary sanctuary. He sprints to the back of the dorm, out of sight of the main road. He desperately looks for a door, a crawl space, anything. His eyes land on the septic tank lid. It's a dark hole in the ground. It is literally the last place any pursuer would ever think to look. In a surge of adrenaline, he yanks the heavy lid open.
He goes to climb down into the dark. But as he tries to force his shoulders in, he realizes his heavy winter coat and thick layers are snagging on the concrete. He's too wide. With mere seconds to spare before his pursuer rounds the corner and spots him, he frantically strips off his jacket and shirt.
And the folded shirt?
The neat folding, the police noted, might not have been a leisurely, obsessive-compulsive fold at all. It might have simply been a panicked, desperate bundling of the clothes to protect them from the filth, or to use them as a makeshift padding against the rough concrete. He hugs the bundle to his bare chest, takes a deep breath, and shoves himself headfirst down the pipe, dragging his remaining shoe with him.
He wriggles down into the pitch black, ignoring the scrapes on his knees and elbows, holding his breath against the overwhelming stench. He makes it to the flat bottom section. He contorts himself into a fetal position, hiding in the absolute darkness, listening to the muffled crunch of footsteps in the snow above.
Just waiting for them to leave.
He waits,
Yeah.
and he waits, until the footsteps fade away and the danger passes. But when he finally tries to push himself backward, back up the vertical pipe to safety, he realizes the horrifying truth. His arms are pinned against his sides. His knees are locked against the unyielding concrete. The human Chinese finger trap has sprung. In his desperate attempt to hide from a temporary threat, he has inadvertently locked himself inside a frozen, inescapable tomb.
Both the voyeur theory and the fleeing theory perfectly fit the physical parameters of the crime scene, the lack of defensive wounds, and the autopsy findings. We may never know for absolute certain which overpowering human emotion, a dark, uncontrollable desire, or sheer blind animal terror drove Naoki Kanno into the ground that night. But both paths lead to the exact same tragic reality.
And that reality is deeply sobering. When we step back, when we strip away the decades of internet sensationalism, the wild political conspiracies, and the supernatural ghost stories, we are left staring at a profound reminder of human fragility.
It's just so sad.
Whether he was driven by a compulsion he couldn't control or he was fleeing for his life in a state of absolute panic, Naoki's death is a brutal testament to how one terrible split-second decision can lead to an agonizing demise. A healthy young man with a bright future, highly respected by his peers, slowly freezing to death over 48 hours, unable to move a single inch, just feet away from salvation.
The legacy of this case is immense. Officially, in the eyes of the Japanese legal system, the file remains closed. The statute of limitations for any potential foul play related to the event expired in 2004. The Miharu police never reopened the investigation, despite the 4,300 signatures from a village that simply couldn't accept the truth.
But unofficially, it's alive and well.
Unofficially, Naoyuki's death has transcended a local Fukushima tragedy. It lives on globally. It is meticulously debated on Reddit, reconstructed in YouTube documentaries, and shared on TikTok as a modern digital legend. It endures because it bypasses our logical brains and preys directly on our most primal, deeply wired human fears: extreme claustrophobia, the suffocating dark, the biting cold, and the horrifying universal dread of dying completely alone and entirely misunderstood by the world.
It taps into the darkest corners of our imagination. We put ourselves in that pipe, and the empathy is suffocating.
It really is. But before we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final lingering thought to mull over. Let's assume just for a moment that the fleeing theory is the correct one, that Naoyuki wasn't a voyeur acting out a fantasy, but a terrified young man running for his life from a very real threat.
Okay, if we assume that's true.
If we accept the theory that he was fleeing in terror from a violent confrontation, it means that on that freezing February night in 1989, someone chased him to that dormitory. It means someone stood right there outside in the snow, watched him desperately, frantically squeeze himself down into that dark, horrific pipe to escape, and then, instead of helping him, that person simply turned around and walked away. They walked away knowing exactly what would happen to him in the freezing cold. And that person has been walking free among us, holding on to that secret for over 30 years. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.